Thanks for listening to this podcast of Trending with Timmerie. If you haven't already subscribed, please catch us wherever you love to listen to your podcast, from the Relevant Radio app to Apple, YouTube, you name it, we are there. And if you listen on Apple Podcasts, please be sure to go and give us a 5-star review to help other people discover the podcast. Anything you share in terms of episodes, whether it's texting it to a friend, posting on social media, helps to build up the kingdom for God, to help confront the challenging issues we face as a culture, but with joy, with hope, and with an eternal perspective where our faith collides with everyday life, bringing eternal principles to help us live our life joyfully.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio.
My generation, the millennial generation, is known as, or is pegged as, the dumbest generation. Also, millennials are suffering from unhappiness in the modern culture we're living in. Does this have to do with how we were raised? Does this have to do with technology? What's going on? Here to discuss this in just a moment will be Mark Bauerlein, editor at First Things magazine, also the author of countless books, including The Dumbest Generation, How the Digital Age Stupefies Young Americans and Jeopardizes Our Future. He's also the host of the First Things podcast. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. Coming up, we're going to discuss how we can create a culture of respect and listening again. I'll share with you a shocking protest that happened at a university in Texas surrounding a speaker that upheld being in favor of a boy being a boy and a girl being a girl, and not playing science or politics or taking any sort of agenda onto a little kid's perhaps suffering from gender dysphoria. We'll also weigh in with how Disney has had something to do with the so-called Don't Say Gay bill, and much more, including taking your questions. The number's 1-888-914-9149. Joining me now is Professor Emeritus of English at Emory University and editor of the First Things magazine. He hosts the podcast twice a week for First Things, and he's written a number of books having to do with my generation, the millennial generation. Mark Bauerlein, welcome to Trending.
Hello, Timmerie. Please call me Mark.
Mark, let's talk about what is being coined. In part, you are responsible for this by calling my generation, millennials, those born really between the early 80s all the way through 1996, the dumbest generation. People are saying not only are we dumb, we're also unhappy, we're self-centered, we're the iGen. We get a bad rap, justifiably so at times, but why have you pegged my generation the dumbest generation?
Well, in the first book I wrote, The Dumbest Generation, that was 2008. And what I saw there was this deluge of screens, digital tools, social media happening in this first decade of the third millennium. And it was hitting teenagers very hard. They were, you guys were out in front on the social media. You were doing Facebook, you were taking these handhelds, as they were called, and doing all these innovative, adroit things with them. You were texting 3,000 texts per month by 2010. The handhelds kept going down the age ladder as the years passed.
Yes.
And millennials were pegged as the ones who were going to lead America on this digital revolution. You were going to take these tools and become the most knowledgeable, ambitious, college-going, tolerant, progressive generation in human history. There was a lot of cheerleading going on in those Web 2.0 days back then, and a few of us said, no, this is an awful thing for us to do. We are handing the kids these tools that are going to enable them to envelop themselves in youth culture and peer pressure all the time. They can surround themselves with screens in their bedrooms all night long. They got the music going, the TV is still on. They're playing the video game. They've got the phone, and they have the laptop open, doing all kinds of things. Broadcast yourself, as YouTube put it. All the social media was growing. Twitter was coming on in 2008. And this was going to shield them from a lot of the good adult realities and some not so good adult realities of politics and history, religion, great literature, just more the grown-up things in life. And that they're not being well prepared spiritually, morally, emotionally, and intellectually for adulthood. It's very, very bad for a 15-year-old to walk around with 250 photos of himself in his pocket. Timmerie, this is feeding into the adolescent ego and holding them there. So that's what the first book came out, and I said, this is not going to turn out well. And now 15 years we are past, and so I have this update. The millennials, the dumbest generation, grows up 33 years old. And how is this confident, enterprising, optimistic millennial doing? Not so good. The rates of depression are up, anxiety, narcissism. You know, who would have thought that when we handed kids a tool where they could take a picture of the food they're going to ingest 10 seconds later, that they would become narcissistic, right? So, the social attitudes have gone a little sour. They were hailed for their tolerance back in 2005, but now they actually register as the most intolerant, more intolerant than older age groups. They have a certain social mistrust, the researchers call it. They mistrust their fellow workers, their fellow citizens, and they actually have a little bit of a vindictive sense of events where if they see an injustice go on, a microaggression happen, they want to see that party punished. The culprit must go down. And that's why they lead the way on the cancel culture that we see.
Even ignoring
this
the
is
justice
why
system.
the event you just mentioned in Texas, this has been repeated many, many times. The shout downs, the disruptions, the temper tantrums, just for someone speaking an opinion, let's say a biblical worldview on sexuality, which 90% of the country held up until recent, more or less recent times. They're overreactive. They're fragile, and they're fragile in a way that makes them highly defensive to the point where if you express a contrary opinion, they don't just walk away and say, okay, whatever. No, they say, you must be quiet. This is where the subtitle of the new book, The Dumbest Generation Grows Up, is From Stupefied Youth to Dangerous Adults.
You know, it's interesting because many listening will be millennials, and you know, our generation is known to have a bit of a bad rap, and I really do say justifiably so. And I can even speak to much of what you were just discussing. You know, we were meant to be the pioneers when it came to bringing us into the digital age, using the latest technologies, Mark. And I even find myself, I found myself starting college in 2009, and I was, had a great job through college. I was a social media guru, and I burnt out. And I was so burnt out after working my way through college and using social media of always having a screen on for work, always having a screen on socially. It was the way you found out about events at school. It was the way you communicated. It was the way you did your homework. Even classes that were supposed to be in person were taken online. And so I know I personally kind of tried to pull back, and I'm so grateful for that desire to pull back, but it's hard, day to day when, we have so many emails coming in, the predominant means of communication today being text message or email. Many people will say, well, what are you asking of us if this is how we are being told to function socially as well as professionally? Yeah. But let's dive a little bit, Mark, into how this has essentially led to, as you mentioned, kind of overall dissatisfaction and unhappiness in millennials. We're seeing massive numbers of people identifying as lonely, depressed, anxious, being highly medicated for this high suicidality among millennials. Why is there a connection behind the stupefaction of my generation and the dissatisfaction?
Well, I think what you just said a moment ago is telling. You said you kind of burnt out on it. And Timmerie, one of the reasons why I wrote the previous book was I saw in 2006, 2007, sitting out on the quad at Emory University, where I taught for a long time, between classes, the kids were suddenly walking around with their eyes glued to this tiny screen. They had been in class, they were out of the network, out of the loop, and they were going from building to building. They had to check in. And what I saw was they did not have joy on their faces. This wasn't really fun. There was a little bit of a look of consternation. They weren't sure where they stood because are people meeting down at Starbucks? Has some gossip been tossed around? Mm-hmm. Is there a message? Is there a photo that they
FOMO,
need to
fear
see?
Missing out.
And yeah, exactly. And that's very hard for a 19-year-old. You don't want to miss out. Shunning is an awful, awful condition to fall into, which, of course, the digital tools ramped up. And so I don't think that this was something that really was pleasing. It produced an anxiety, and this was the opposite of what the social media gurus were saying it was going to do. You'll find companionship on here. You'll find community. I can't remember if it was Mark Zuckerberg or Reid Hoffman, maybe, who founded LinkedIn, who said, with social media, what we're trying to do is make it so that you never, ever have to be alone. Now, we know, look at the Gospels. Jesus knows that at certain moments he must go off, get away from people, and be alone. Now, he's going to the Father, but he does get away from other people. This is a necessity for all spiritual life. You must have moments of reflection, of contemplation. Contemplation, the root of contemplation is temple. You must be off by yourself and get out of the social network and commune. You must pray at times. You want to tell the millennials, unfortunately, the nuns phenomenon is very strong among the millennials. They are not going to church. A lot of them have some vague spiritual sense of things, but it's not organized in any way. They don't sit and pray every night. And you want to say to them, do you know how powerful, how comforting often, not always, but often comforting it is to step out and to address that divine being way beyond, way above you, all around you. This is an experience that you must have. And when you pick up that phone, when you get into the texting and everything else, life speeds up so much that you don't learn to be alone in a productive way. You get lonely and you try to address that loneliness in the wrong way. And we did this to them. I mean, it sounds like I'm criticizing, and I do, that title, managed to insult 93 million Americans. But, there's one chapter in the first book called The Betrayal of the Mentors. Mm-hmm. We didn't give you God. We didn't give you country. The country the educators said was, this is a country that is racist and genocidal and imperialistic, and you need to be ashamed of it. Only 1/3 of millennials consider themselves patriots. We didn't give you strong family traditions and strong communities. We didn't give you great literature and great music, great art. We let you go into youth world. And that's why the first sentence of this new book, The Dumbest Generation Grows Up, is, what have we done to them?
What happened?
And I really mean it.
And
we let you down, Timmerie.
And I want to talk a little bit about, where were the warnings? Why didn't parents know, and why don't they know, and what can be done? But as you're talking, it reminded me so much of, I believe, a very prophetic book that came out maybe around 5 years ago now by Cardinal, The Power of Silence Against the Dictatorship of Noise. And it was a book that so deeply just spoke to me because we live in a culture that is so noisy. There's always, this call for us to share an opinion. There's always this call to have a take on something. There's always this call to have music on or play a YouTube video, constantly being berated by noise. And so that book, speaks so penetratingly into, I think, especially the millennial generation. If anyone's still trying to figure out what to do this Lent, that book, you can take a paragraph at a time and just meditate and convict your heart about how we are utilizing our technology and our voices and our minds today. Because as you're saying, Mark, the generation that I've lived in, was really introduced by technology in the early 2000s. So as we were kind of going into our teen years and early adolescence, it was quickly adopted in education and even in leisurely time. And so the question I have is, because so many parents are looking back and maybe feeling guilty or frustrated or wondering, did I do something wrong? And some might be asking, where was the research warning parents of technology use? And why don't parents know about this today? Or why is there such a disregard when it is brought up?
Let me say what you said about the silence there and how important that is. I was a militant, atheist, liberal kind of guy through the 80s and 90s and aughts mostly. I came back into the Catholic. I was baptized Catholic, but my parents got all caught up in the 60s, and that was that. So I came back into the church about 5 or 6 years ago. I started, and I'll tell you, one thing that drew me in was I'm in New York. I was working at First Things, living in Father Newhouse's old apartment, and my son was going to school at a school up on 64th Street and Park Avenue, and there was a church on 66th and Lexington, St. Vincent Ferrer, and I went in there. You can't really tell from the outside, but you go in there, and it's a beautiful space inside. It's kind of dark. It was quiet, and I went in there, and I would sit in the pew in the dimness, and it did exactly what it was supposed to do. It brought me out of the world in a way, and it brought me closer to spiritual power, a force inside there, a presence. It just worked. I can't describe it very well, but I couldn't have done it if I'm checking my phone. I couldn't have done it if I've got a ding every time a text message comes through. We've introduced so many distractions, so many diversions. It never stops. And it's been worked into our lives. And you say, why did this happen? Yeah. Why did we let this happen? Well, remember in 2005, there was so much enthusiasm about the web. All this knowledge is out there, this abundant profusion. We can order things online. We can find things so much easier. We can get things more cheaply. We can sell things. We can get rid of stuff and make contact with other people far away who are just like us and share things. Grandparents can contact their grandkids across the country. And people were making a lot of money off of this. And Silicon Valley hired experts in addiction and attention to help them design these tools. I talk about this in the book.
Behavior scientists.
They got the whole industry and the scientists to get our kids addicted. We are fighting $1 billion industry. And by the way, the Silicon Valley leaders, they don't let their kids get online that much. They keep their kids away. Stephen Jobs famously didn't let his kids do a lot of screen time. They send their kids to things like the Waldorf schools, which are low
tech. My husband
tech.
worked in Silicon Valley for a couple years, and it was fascinating. I mean, none of them let their kids have technology, not even going into high school. They sent them to special schools, private schools, no technology, and because they wanted them to have social skills. They want them to get into the Ivy League schools and thrive. But they know that won't occur with the technologies they created because they literally worked with addiction specialists to get these kids addicted to these technologies. And so it makes you think, and this is why we talk about it so often on Trending, how do you kind of get that level of happiness and joy back in the culture? How do you rediscover these social communication skills, the friendships, studying, appreciating music? We're going to come back with Mark Bauerlein here on Trending with Timmerie to discuss how to become happy again if you're a millennial, how to get over the stupefication of our generation that has indeed occurred so that we can ultimately grow closer to God and rediscover ourselves and those relationships that we so deeply long for. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. If you have a question for my guest, Mark Bauerlein, the number's 1-888-914-9149. You can also ask your question now on Instagram at Timmerie, that's Timmerie. Today's show is sponsored by Kolbe Academy. With more than 40 years of experience in Catholic home education, Kolbe Academy offers a blend of classical Catholic curriculum
and the latest educational technology. More info at relevantradio.com/Colby.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
My guest today, Mark Bauerlein, is the author of the new book, The Dumbest Generation Grows Up, From Stupefied Youth to Dangerous Adults. That's my generation, millennials, usually those pegged as born between 1980 and 1996. And this book touches on the deepest longings of my generation, the issues surrounding loneliness, depression, anxiety, even answering kind of that question of, sometimes we are thriving in the workplace, sometimes we're really floundering, and it answers the question as to why is that floundering occurring, or why are we thriving in the workplace but really struggling socially in our personal lives. And to touch on this and really address the happiness side, I want to get to how we can find a solution. And so my question, Mark, as you're with us today, is in the face of the problem that technology has become for stupefying and desocializing my generation, how can millennials take back their lives and be happy again?
I would say to the parents in our audience or the elders of some kind who have contact with millennials, you probably notice that they're not happy. There's a sour mood that prevails among American young adults. And that's a sign that this is not working for them. That's the space where we enter in and tell them, let them know, push upon them that there is something better. There is a lot better out there that will work for you. Do you know how wonderful it is to read the Sermon on the Mount, to come across the line, thy will be done, not my will be done, which is what the internet, all the social media is all about. My will, myself, right? I'm going to make my Facebook page, give my text to talk about me, to record the incidents of my life. No, that is a burden to be this way. It does, as we said, it makes you narcissistic. And remember the story of Narcissus. Narcissus doesn't end well. He dies young and he dies miserable. This is the fate of a Facebook addict. A social media, and Facebook's passé now, right? Instagram or TikTok. This is not making you happy. You read the Sermon on the Mount. You read St. Paul, oh my brethren, whatever is good, whatever is true, whatever is lovely, whatever is noble, think on the, and so on. Think on these things. Let's go watch a Shakespeare play, Julius Caesar, friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. Let's go look into the great moments of history, great sacrifice, great villainy, great heroism as well. It's so much better. Let's go listen to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony instead of your hip-hop pounding, raucous pop music. You are going to be happier. In fact, you're going to become a more interesting person, a more grounded human being. Set aside a time to be alone, to be with yourself, to be with your God, to be with whatever you wish to commune with outside of the worldliness of things. And we need, if you want to break a habit, a bad habit, often you've got to substitute it with other habits that are going to be good, that promise some fulfillment. And the thing is, Timmerie, we know we got the goods. We have the great stuff. I mean, we've got the book of Job. We have the letters of St. Paul. We've got Augustine in that pear orchard, right? We've got the great operas of Puccini and Verdi. We've got the noble sacrifices at Valley Forge. This is so much better than your youth culture stuff. You can't spend the rest of your life pretending you're one of those characters in that Friends TV show from the 1990s. This is not fulfillment, and we know it now. You're 35 years old. You've got to start thinking. It's time to put away childish things. And I think if we push that attentively and we show how good it is, this will be better for you. That's the message.
Mark, as you were talking, I was really thinking about the significance of the arts and how we've lost the appreciation for the arts. And it's fascinating. I have a 14-month-old daughter, and many people know we are hardcore no screens. Of course, her looking at a photo of a family member or occasionally FaceTiming a family member is one thing, but, she does not have screens otherwise. And we don't have a TV because we don't want her around all of that. But it's interesting because she's 14 months old now, and I grew up classically trained in dance and ballet and danced with the Russian ballet company, the Kirov, in Washington, D.C. in high school. And I had classical music on today, and I was dancing in front of her, and a 14-month-old had undivided, captivated attention on ballet dancing. And it struck me, just hit me right between the eyes, that this little girl was engaged in the beauty of what is known as an art of dancing. And yet today, the captivation and attention span for a little kid is often spent, on an iPad looking at something, can't stay in track in a conversation with an adult for very long. And of course, she's only 14 months old. They can't really have conversations yet. But I was fascinated by the fact that she could be so drawn in by art. And I think that we've lost that appreciation. In order to foster that again, in order to foster that fine attention to detail, that fine eye to detail, to have that attention span, to have a conversation, we have to start that young again. We have to return to appreciating and listening as a culture. And I think this will help our conversations with one another as well, Mark.
You're doing a very good thing, a valuable thing for your child when you do this, because you're giving her rhythm, grace, beauty at a time when her hard wiring is really developing. We do not want to attach them to the TV at these young ages. We do not want them overstimulated, the bells and whistles of the laptop. And in fact, when they have asked children about whether they like a real book, a big picture book, or they want the e-version of that book, even though the e-version will have these little buttons you can push to make sounds or pictures will come up, the small children like the father, the mother, to read to them with the real physical object. They want the tactile experience. They want that thing in front of them. They love turning the pages. And even if they've read the book 50 times, they love that next page, the rhyme that is going to follow in these children's books. So what we want to do is, that slow down, that appreciation. Again, you're doing the ballet. You've got the beautiful music going. And by the way, children love classical music. They have a natural feel for again, the rhythm, the string, the sound, the strings, the horns. There was something when I was a child that was a national sensation. It was the Leonard Bernstein children's concerts that he did in Carnegie Hall. He led the symphony in classical music, and this is high classical music, Mahler and Wagner. And he would break it down for them. He'd explain to them about melody and chords and harmony, and the kids in the audience were mesmerized by this, and it was so popular, they actually put it on prime time at a certain point because everyone loved this. Remember the cartoons, Bugs Bunny, filled with classical music. Kids loved. It was funny. It was used for often comic effect, but that only enhanced the joy of it. So yes, very much give your children art at a young age when they're forming, and let them exercise their imaginations. The screen tells them everything. It gives them the sounds. It gives them the sights. They don't have to imagine nearly as much as when they're reading the book or watching you dance a character or an episode in Swan Lake or something. So you're doing Timmerie. You're the kind. We need a lot of mothers like you.
And it's hard, Mark. If you're just joining us, you're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. Mark Bauerlein from First Things, author of the book The Dumbest Generation Grows Up, From Stupefied Youth to Dangerous Adult. We're talking about how millennials on down can take back their happiness, regain knowledge and love and appreciation and skills such as social skills and listening. I look at what's happening and my jaw just absolutely dropped. I'm going to talk about this later. I know you saw this as well, Mark. The protest of students at the university in northern Texas, and they wouldn't listen to anyone. Universally, a classroom of, assume at least 30, 45 students protesting and cussing at an adult who came to give a speech. I'll share that with you in just a moment here on the show, but my jaw dropped because I thought, how could so many people unified at a public school have no opinion for themselves? Well, this is why Mark wrote the piece that he did, because we can't think for ourselves. We are so easily influenced by others. We are so disrespectful toward, not just those who are older than us, but our peers as well. We have no love for the younger generations. This is why people don't care about getting married. They don't care about making the commitment to have children and be married, and I think that this is why taking back the future for ourselves and others is so important. Getting rid of pings and notifications on our phones, locking your phone away on the weekend. I have to do it. I grew up with technology. It's easy for me to be addicted to it, Mark. I think it's easy for any adult to be addicted to it, not just children. And we've been talking about this, but what would you recommend? Maybe some of your talk recommendations that you yourself have implemented as technology has grown such a prominent part of our lives to help in reading more and listening to more music and having better conversations.
One of the conditions that produced things like the temper tantrums when let's say a biblical speaker shows up on campus, and people just go crazy over this. They are genuinely out of control. One of the things we have to see is this is the result of many years of conditioning to make these young people so intolerant, so enraged. They're frightening. They're bullies while playing, the cry bullying thing. I'm the victim. No. You're victimizing other people. This is your projection all the way. One of the reasons this happened was they went through their adolescence. I talked about them going into the room, turning on all those screens. They could fabricate a reality in that room that was all affirming. It would reinforce everything they believe, everything they want to be. It would eliminate the contrary, the disagreeable. If you have 200 people on your Facebook, friend list, and one of those friends says something you don't like, you can just unfriend that person. You get all these text messages, and someone sends a text message that you don't like, you can block that number from your phone. So that room was a little utopian area for them. It was a bubble. And it was a very nice bubble for them to be in. And they spent years in that room simply reinforcing themselves and what they believe and believing that all the world should be like this. So when we see them go to college and do the shout downs and the protests, what they are doing is bringing that little perfect world of the bedroom into the public space, into the workplace, into the college space as well. And they think
that's Mark Bauerlein from First Things magazine here on Relevant Radio. The dumbest generation grows up from stupefied youth to dangerous adults. This is a warning for all of us, whether adults or those raising children, to help one another in listening and not just acting like we're talking to a cell phone. We talk to other people. I'll be right back.
We're talking about what you're thinking about. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. Mark Bauerlein, author of The Dumbest Generation Grows Up. Incredible book. I highly recommend it. We'll include a link in the podcast notes. But I want to touch briefly on the question I asked him, and that is, as millennials, we're pegged as the dumbest generation. We're suffering and struggling from dissatisfaction, loneliness, anxiety, suicidality. What can be done? And he pegged that the crisis has to do with the use of technology in our lives, the addictive behavior, the lack of socialization. And I can say firsthand, I grew up with, having a iPhone right after it came out. I had a cell phone early on, for safety reasons, to communicate with my parents. I was dancing and gone. I had that personal laptop to watch movies whenever I wanted. These technologies were viewed as a good thing, a fun thing. And there was little to no warning. I know in our house we didn't play video games. We know that was problematic and harmful. And we discussed with Melanie Hempy the problems of video games, among other things. But the crisis right now for my generation, starting with millennials down, and I'll also argue the generations above me as well, is technology moderation. Being able to turn off that phone. It's okay if you miss something. Yes, a crisis, an emergency could happen, but it's okay. Turning off the phone, leaving it at home, locking it in a drawer, getting rid of all of those email notifications, text notifications. I'm saturated by my phone and technology. I don't do well with prolonged amount of time on my screen. I have to break it up. Half an hour, 20 minutes, get up and walk around, do something, take handwritten notes for things. I take all handwritten notes almost for the radio show because I need to learn better, and I learn better with handwriting, even though for years, from high school through college, I used to, say, I have this issue where my hand aches from taking handwritten notes. And it is easier to take notes on a computer, but I learned less. My attention span was shorter. And so I want to encourage you, take those steps to decrease phone use and technology use. Take the time to pick up the phone and call people more often. Use the opportunity we have before us to have and exert self-control this Lent in the way we use our technology so that we can have better social skills, so we can enjoy the silent moments in life to pray or reflect on those good and difficult moments throughout our day and how we can grow. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. We've had a number of questions come in, two of which I'd really like to discuss here. One of the questions came in about yesterday's conversation with celebrity and world matchmaker Christina Pineda. Christina mentioned during the show that when it comes to dating, she actually advises her bachelors and bachelorettes to wait 3 months until entering into an exclusive relationship. So what she was saying is to date for a few months before making it an official relationship. And I hadn't heard her say this before. She's a regular guest on the show, and it was fascinating to hear her explanation. I know Ellen from Chicago emailed to ask, she said, I'm hoping for a little clarification. It sounded like your guest was suggesting that young people should not be, quote, exclusive for at least 3 months. She said, so she's suggesting that young men and women date around a few girls and guys at the same time, quote, keeping their options open, that at the 3-month point become exclusive. It's a great question for clarification. I think that we as a culture, my generation, dating culture, we've lost this idea of being more intentional with relationships. We tend to fall into relationship after relationship without really discerning, is this someone I actually want to date and discern marriage with, or is this someone I'm just having fun with? And so what Christine is encouraging is that before you enter into another relationship that should be gearing you toward ultimately to marriage, before you do that, take the time to pause a little, put on the brakes, get to know the person more in more light-hearted dating, but intentional dating circumstances before necessarily becoming in an official relationship. Now, yes, that word exclusive could be used in there, and I do support, and I've talked about it here on Trending, I think that when dating, if you're dating and not in a relationship and you are dating multiple people, I think that is okay as long as you are clear with the other person. Like, hey, we're clear and transparent. This is not a relationship. We're going on dates, getting to know each other. And if you are going to go on dates with other people, you need to let that person know. Especially for women, it can be very disheartening and sensitive for us to hear and know that a man is dating another woman at the same time if we perhaps thought that we were in a relationship. But if we know as a woman, you know as a man, that we're both mutually getting to know and date other people and that this is not an official relationship, well, if both are in agreement with those parameters, if there's proper communication, this provides opportunity for communication and getting to know each other without just falling into a 3, 4, 5 month long or 5 year long dating relationship that kind of just happened because there wasn't that intentionality and that slowness and discernment occurring before dating. So just a thought on that. Another question that came in from Sophie on Instagram. She said, what should I say when pro-choicers bring up cases of rape as being the reason for abortion? This is a fantastic question that comes up time and time again, especially with the debate surrounding the overturning of Roe versus Wade in the coming months by the Supreme Court of the United States. I think that we have to be prepared to better answer this question. First of all, it's important to recognize that it's really less than a percentage of all abortions that occur for the cases of rape, health of the mother, or incest. And so I think first we have to be able at times to say, okay, well, if someone can't get over the rape argument surrounding abortion, that should be the justification for legal abortion. I do always recommend try to see if you could talk to your opponent and say, for a moment, can we agree to disagree that in the cases I agree that rape should always be, or abortion in the case of rape should always be the wrong choice for the mom and the baby, and you disagree, but let's talk about the other 99% of abortions that are occurring daily, electively, not because of health of the mother or rape. So I think that that's one thing that we have to do and not get too focused on this, although it is important and we should try to convince the person we are debating with. However, we do have to answer the question, and the answer to the question is very, very important. What do you do in the instances of rape as a reason for legal abortion? Well, we need to understand the situation, the experience, the horrible experience of a woman who has been raped. When a woman has been raped, she is a victim of a crime, a terrible thing that has happened to her, that she will need healing to go through the trauma of what has happened to her. Now, some people say, well, can't she just have an abortion if she finds out she's pregnant and move on with her life? Can't you, as pro-life, just, give this one mercy, that's one option to women? No. And here's why. First and foremost, when we talk about abortion, no matter the circumstance, rape or not, we're talking about at least 2 human beings, the mother and the baby. And we have to remember that that baby is an innocent bystander to the situation of the rape that occurred. Just because that child's life began in a traumatic and harmful way does not give anyone license to kill. And it's important to remember that not even the rapist himself, the guilty party, not even the rapist receives the death sentence. Why would we give the death sentence to the baby? An innocent baby who's dependent upon grown adults, other human beings to defend him or her. But second, we have to come back. So that's the important part of understanding the humanity, the personhood of the baby. But the other perspective is to focus on the woman. The woman is the victim of a terrible crime. But what happens in the cases, and many studies have shown and been done, and I've worked firsthand with women who have been raped and have been through the challenging decision of keeping their baby or having an abortion, raising their baby or placing their baby for adoption. And what we've seen time and time again in the crisis pregnancy centers, counseling in front of the abortion clinics, that women who have experienced a rape need to heal. And when a woman has an abortion, that healing process is stymied. It's difficultly and negatively impacted. That woman who identified as a victim before now identifies more so with the perpetrator than as a victim, because she sees herself, she views herself, no matter the circumstances, as the mother or as an individual who has done harm to an innocent party, just as the rapist has done harm to her, who is an innocent party. And so her capacity to heal from the rape is negatively impacted, and now she has another damaging psychologically, physically, and emotionally thing to work through that makes the healing from the rape even worse, because now she has the aftermath of the abortion and the new wrongful psychological connection identifying with the rapist more so than being the victim. I'll never forget, some years ago, I was debating the feminist professor at Cal State San Marcos in Southern California in San Diego. And this question came up over and over again. I answered the question about rape 3 or 4 times. After the talk, a young woman came up to me, a Vietnamese woman, and with tears in her eyes, she said, "Thank you." She said, "Thank you for sharing what you shared." She said, "I was that woman who was raped. I was encouraged to have an abortion. I had an abortion, and my capacity to heal from that rape is exactly what you're saying. I started to see myself as the one who did harm, to see myself like the rapist rather than someone who was a victim of a crime. Thank you for saying that." And here this woman was on a college campus suffering from the wounds of the rape and from the wounds of the abortion. No one was willing to tell her the truth, and under the law, she's not just legally capable of having an abortion in the instance of rape and in the instance of a traumatic and trying and sensitive time in her life, but she's encouraged by medical professionals and family members and friends to have an abortion because the law says that a person should be able to kill another person. That's what abortion is, and that is so damaging for a woman. And so I think it's really important that we understand and are able to answer the questions surrounding what about rape, and that is a reason for legalizing abortion, because it is not a sound reason for keeping abortion legal, and it is harming women who have been gravely harmed in the instances of rape. And if you want to learn a little bit more, I want to encourage you to check out the website savetheone.com. That's savethe1.com. We'll actually post a link. Jim will post a link to that on social media right now, and we'll include as well a link to that in the podcast notes for today's show. That's savethe1.com. I want to share with you some audio of what happened this week. It was a shocking moment where my jaw absolutely just dropped. The students at the University of North Texas protested a speaker, Jeff Younger, who came in, who is pro male and female and no sexual transition based on a transgender identity. Listen to how they welcomed him when he was trying to speak on the University of North Texas. Here is a group of college students universally clapping and chanting as Jeff Younger there, who is someone who he actually lost custody of one of his twin sons because he was being pressured to usher his 8 or 9-year-old little boy into a transgender identity by the mother. A pro-transgender psychologist and judge granted custody to the mother and are continuing to transition this little boy. And so Jeff Younger is there on the university campus speaking, and they have protests of all these students yelling, cussing at this man on a university campus, cussing at him, calling him a fascist. And we had to bleep out the audio because what I saw in this instance, how we have been brainwashed as a generation. We can't think for ourselves. This nearly universal protest shows the need to regain respect for others and have the ability to listen and value others' opinions even when we disagree with them. So I want to encourage you to ponder that as we head into this weekend. Have you joined us yet for our weekly happy hour on trending? This is Timmerie from Trending with Timmerie. Mondays we discuss everything from happiness, although it's fleeting, to joy, which is rooted in God.
We address midlife crises, prayer, friendship, job satisfaction, and you name it, because who doesn't want to have lasting happiness, joy rooted in God? Join me daily at 6 p.m. Central on Relevant Radio or the Relevant Radio app.